Welcome back, Lisa. Thank you for being here and being part of this. And welcome, clinical assistant professor, Alina now I've got your name, Kislenko. Elena is joining us from Canada, where she is the assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioural Neurosciences. And that's all I'm going to say, because I want you to tell us more.
Sure. Okay, so I'm also a registered psychotherapist, and I run a couple of counseling centers specializing in ADHD and autism, called the ADHD and Spectrum Center, and also we specialize in giftedness. And we've been doing this for about maybe 12 or so years now. And I started it because I'm very passionate about ADHD, autism, giftedness. I was all those myself. I'm diagnosed with all that. And so we want to create like a safe place to process things with, and all of our practitioners we hire are only, they have ADHD or autism themselves too. So we really want to create an environment that was like not traumatizing for a lot of neurodivergent people who had a lot of trauma, especially around education. That's me.
But how did you get through school, or how did you find school?
So awful. It was the worst thing ever, and I did a lot of it, and it got better over the years. Like, I found, like, undergrad to me was way harder than my graduate studies, because it's just you're such a generalist learning everything, versus then you kind of more specialize. And that's often true for a lot of neurodivergent people. Grad school is seen as like more positive than undergrad or often high school, because you're getting more specialized in our special interests. But I had so many issues and had developed so much educational trauma, so I'm so glad we're talking about this today. Just having a lot of, like, I have dyscalculia as well. It's a learning disability around numbers, and I have some writing learning disabilities and reading learning disabilities, and just so many things that people were always just, oh, you're not trying hard enough, you're so smart, you can figure it out. And it was just super abusive. I came from a really high achieving household as well, so I was kind of like the black sheep. Why can't she do school properly? So it was very, very stressful, and I would be doing, like, studying and doing my homework for like 25 hours, more than all my other the other students per week. And it was just a constant grind. There was never a free moment. And eventually I actually developed some systems for education that I ended up now, like, I teach a lot at our centers and things like that helped me learn and helps a lot of other people when you have, like, really smaller working memory. And we learn so much more, like, through association, through oh, I'm really interested to learn in how, like, why can Rick and Morty space travel? So, like, let's learn about physics. Let's learn about whatever I can learn with a cool frame. But much of school teaches you more with, like, well, let's teach you a bit about this, like, random thing in physics and this other random thing, and I can't connect it to my life, so I forget all of them. And by the time they give me something interesting, I don't understand all the little pieces that go in it. I've forgotten everything. So, yeah, just the form of learning has always been really different than my brain, and most neurodivergent brains learn. So, yeah. How about you both?
Well, Alina, do you mind if I ask, like, who helped you in school to get to the place where you are now? Anybody? Teacher-wise?
I was kind of just, I actually didn't really connect to a lot of teachers. Often I was learning things in a very different way, and they were like, no, you're doing it wrong. And I'm like, but this is the only way I can understand it. So I had trouble connecting to teachers. My parents would help me a bit after school, but that was also terrifying and often a big problem and caused just a lot of, we're from Soviet, like, Ukraine, so our family's just really into, like, yelling a lot and demanding things and saying, but your sister can do it. So it wasn't that helpful. And my parents have really apologized since they've learned more about the ADHD and autism, which we only figured out in my early 20s. So mostly I got tutors helped. I was able to get some tutoring. I was able to get a grant, something called a BSWD grant in Ontario that's offered, that gives you up to like $8,000 or so per year in, like, paying for, like, coaching / therapy, paying for like technologies that can help. Like, there was this awesome thing called the Live Scribe Smart Pen.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which they've had, like, now they're at, like, version 37,000, but, like, it's so helpful because, like, I would go to class, I would set it to record, and then I would make like little notes with the pen, because it what it does is it records the audio of like what's happening in the lecture, but it ties it to everything you write with the pen. So you can later go, oh, when I wrote down this thing, what was the professor saying?
Great.
Exactly. So that's really helpful. And so, but I would also take a lot of breaks, so I'd make a little note like going on break. And I'd go out, grab a muffin, do a bunch of like push-ups, just like things to wake myself up again in these classes, because like my brain just was like turning off. So then I'd come back and I'd keep learning, and then I'd be able to, okay, I'm back now. And then later I would actually re-listen though to the entire lecture. So the first time I would go just to take it in, I would take very few notes, just like little things with a smart pen. And when I've left, so I extra listen to that. But then I'd go home and I'd have to place every single thing into like a mind map of the course. I'd make flashcards. I'd re-listen to every lecture to do that. Anyway, it was way more work than
normal.
All the other students.
But did you have to figure out on your own how to do that? Like, how did you get from the point of being traumatized, basically, with the work being so difficult, to where you understood how you learned? You had to do that?
I think, honestly, it's not like the best reason, but it's just my family all has like grad degrees and graduate degrees and stuff like that. And in Ukraine, like, it was just very much like you just get a bunch of education, and that's just how it works. So, like, my sister's done like a PhD now, like this, that, you know, and it was just, this is what you do. So I was like, okay, like, to not get all the familial shame, I guess I'll figure it out. No, so like, not a good motivation. And part of what really helped is I've now done like 13 or so years of personal therapy, like, and I'm in therapy like this week, like every week, you know, to process like all the difficulties of you know, pushing this hard and doing the things to like do the education, even though it was incredibly damaging a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. And now I really take that with me when I teach others, like in my classes and things. I'm just like, how do I support the learners and not traumatize them? Which is, that kind of goes against education sometimes. So yeah. It's been a really tough journey, a lot of trauma.
I bet.
Yeah.
It sounds like, you know, your trauma began very early on, and it continued at home.
Yeah, definitely.
True.
Like, yeah, and actually, this is a cool time to bring up something called big T and small T trauma, which me and Lisa were talking a bit about before the show. I don't know, Lisa, do you want to talk a bit about that?
Well, yeah, we were talking a little bit beforehand, and as I mentioned, I work as a mental health nurse now, and I worked in the ER prior to that. And what I see in the mental health field is that a lot of people will put a lot of emphasis on what we would consider the big T traumas, so that when you're working with a client and you ask the client, have you had trauma, they'll say, why, yes, I have. And then the client thinks of the big thing, like the thing that they think we want to hear. Like, they'll think, oh, well, somebody may have had to die, or we were homeless, or something big. And they never seem to recognize this. I hate to say small, because I don't think these traumas are small, but they're continuous, let's call them, in the case of kids learning in school, if they're neurodivergent, continuous failures every day.
Yeah.
And that really does a number on their self-esteem, causes a lot of anxiety and depression. And then here's where we see a lot of the mental health problems, but people don't necessarily link that with trauma. They think trauma is an accident, or someone died, or whatever. And I don't know if it's a matter of people are also feeling a little bit embarrassed maybe by their schooling, or they just simply don't link it. I'm not sure why they don't see that as traumatizing, but when you ask people who have come through a school system that didn't get them, it has been traumatizing, as it turns out.
Oh my gosh, yes, so much. And also, a lot of times we process our trauma with our adult brain, so we think about it, so we go, oh, these kids, like, let's say these kids didn't want to play with me. Well, that's not a big deal. People, as an adult, people don't want to hang out with me all the time. I'm fine. But as a kid, when you have this tiny world, you can't control where you live, you can't control what school you go to, you can't control who you're going to see for like 8 hours a day or whatever. And then things go badly there, especially if you're in a stage of learning, like, oh, who am I when making friends? Do people tend to like me or not? You know, am I an extrovert or an introvert? Do I spend, you know, like, when you're kind of just understanding and going through a lot of growth as a kid, you're very vulnerable. So something, so small trauma, not small trauma, small T traumas, which are, if not like the same but worse than big T trauma, than the big obvious stuff, because you have like nothing to claim. But anyway, but if you're having a small T trauma, like what you calls it, say, yeah, you studied really hard for a test, and the next day the teacher goes, oh, well, from your results, I can obviously see you didn't study again. You're like, well, I just studied. It's very easy for that to become a trauma. Like, no matter what I do, it's never good enough, so just don't even try. And that's a thing adults take into their lives,
I like how you said obvious. Maybe that's how we have to say it. Obvious trauma versus not so obvious trauma. Because it's not bigger or smaller. But I like how you said that, and that's true. And I also like how you said about people thinking from their adult brain. I didn't consider that. That's a great point.
Yeah, and if we have to do it like all the time with clients, a client will be like, oh, this happened when I was younger. You know, it was no big deal, and they'll make a joke, and they're like, anyway. And they're like, anyway, but let's go back to this problem I'm having in my relationship. Like, let's talk about the now.
Yes.
And what we learned is that we could talk about the now all day long, but the patterns that they created, like, why are they in this abusive relationship, or why are they in this job that hates them or that they're not good at, like, that, you could talk about that till you're blue in the face, and they'll come up with all sorts of adult explanations. Oh, I guess I'm here because I love the money, and, you know, or I'm afraid to be alone. But then when you go into the childhood component, really their subconscious of like, but what are the lessons you learned? Where did you learn them when you were a kid that has kept you here? Until we talk about that and go like, what did it mean to you back then? What did you lose? Let's feel those feelings. Let's let them out. Then all of a sudden the person's going like, oh, you know what? I left that relationship that was bad for me, and actually I'm applying for new jobs. And that's the thing that creates the change. It's not like, let's talk about how much you hate your job. Often people just get stuck in like the comfort of the catharsis of, oh, my life sucks, and then I talk about how much my life sucks, and I feel like I'm doing something and I feel better, but I don't actually plan to change anything, and I keep doing these bad cycles.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And then I also find that clients that are stuck with a lot of anxiety, and most of them are, they want to medicate that.
Right.
And I think that's another big problem. Again, this is just what I see. I'm sure you see some similar things, but...
Yeah, I mean, well, I'd say there's a lot of misuse of medication, I think, in psychiatry, in just the medical world. Like, for example, a lot of autistics, they'll get anxiety, so they give them anti-anxiety meds or antidepressant meds or whatever for depression. But a lot of the research shows that for autistics, that stuff's often not that effective because you need to actually treat and understand the autism, which does not take pills much of the time. It's much more of a, oh, like I'm left-handed, but I've been using everything right-handed. How do I find all my left-handed tools? Because it's like a totally different way to have a brain. Like, I have to learn through my special interests. Like, other people can learn just like random things. I have to learn through like tea. I love everything about tea. You know, I'll learn high-level quantum like mechanics through tea if you could do that somehow. And also just the environment. Often, let's say for an autistic, if it's the wrong environment, like that's where people are like judgy to them, where like even the temperature's too cold or hot. They're forced to eat things that are really bad for them, like that, like mouthfeel wise and sensory issues. You know, they have to wear clothing they can't, like heels, and they can't really do that. You know, if that's the type of autism they have, they're gonna fall apart. And the ways that autistics or ADDers or gifted people fall apart is often they develop high levels of anxiety, OCD. They develop dissociation, they develop PTSD, all sorts of things that we try to treat the symptom. But if there is neurodivergence at the core, research has found until you're really treating and understanding the neurodivergence, there's just no point in doing most other things. Even with addictions, like you try to treat addictions when it's ADHD or autism,
right?
The addiction just moves to something else. And it's true for a lot of people who aren't neurodivergent as well, where we're too quick to jump to, oh, what medication do we give you? But I think the pandemic has shown us something really important, because in the pandemic, so many people who've never experienced mental health issues experienced huge problematic ones, right? And finally the world was like, okay, maybe all this mental health stuff, maybe the environment, like the pandemic is not a great environment for most people to thrive. You know, so most people now, if you're scared all the time, you feel like no matter what, like the rules are changing all the time, you know, you don't know how to, like what the next steps are, you can't imagine your future, and all of a sudden everyone starts to fall apart.
Right.
And meds aren't going to fix that.
Yeah, and I think they're helpful for some people in some circumstances, but never just alone.
Exactly.
That's what I've found. It always requires something else, counseling or whatever it is, getting to the root cause or the core of why am I feeling anxious. And yeah, I don't know. I could talk about that all day.
But you said something to me that was really fascinating. You said that we've got cycles of behaviour that are built up from when we are children, and that I don't think is not something we talk about much.
I wish we talked about it more, definitely. Because like people think we're walking around as these like adults everywhere, but we're really in a lot of ways these like unformed children, because like psychology is only like 100 years old. Okay, it's still really new, and most of society was built without an understanding that the inside, our emotions, really matter. So most of society was built as if we were robots, and so you're like, okay, is this child oiled and fed and whatever the heck you need to do? Okay, then they'll be fine. And now we're learning that, like, oh gosh, no, they have to be like exposed to things that like for their temper. So if it's a quiet child, like a baby that's like overstimulated, you need to be really careful to not overstimulate them. Or if a child is feeling an emotion, you need to not suppress that, because that will teach them their entire lives they can't feel that emotion properly anymore. And that like every time they feel sad, they actually need to eat candy, or every time they feel sad, they need to look like everything's fine and go be by themselves, instead of actually like tell people something's wrong, someone help me, which is kind of what SAD is for. SAD is like made to make you look kind of pitiful and make you kind of weak and useless, so that other people see that, oh, okay, they need to show you that they support you, and then you feel like in community. So when you're sad, part of it, like we get like it's hard to do things, we just like shut down a bit. But if we're healthily processing SAD, you go to others. I'm sad. I need community support now, because humans are social creatures, right?
Yes.
So, but we're taught so many wrong things about our emotions, that, oh, if you're sad, go hide it somewhere. Nobody likes that. Go put that away. Go distract yourself.
Yeah.
And we have these broken adults walking around that, it makes us much more prone to getting addicted to everything, to not listening to other people, to also traumatizing our own kids, and our own friends that are around us, and our partners. When they're sad, now we're like, oh, put that back in. Nobody cares.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. We were talking to Hillary Jacobs Hendel. Did I say her name right?
Yes.
And she was talking about something similar with the change triangle, she calls it, with the core emotions at the bottom, and we don't really get to those. And I did that as a mother. I was reading part of her book, and it had us do an exercise with how comfortable were we with certain emotions. So it said anger, for example, how comfortable are you with anger? And I'm not comfortable when other people are angry. So as a mom, I would always be trying to shut it down or fix it. I'm a nurse too. I like to fix things. So I pretty much taught my kids that it's really not okay. I am not a safe person to express anger with, even though it's a necessary emotion, evolutionarily, because it means there's a problem. And I think it's fantastic that you have all the people on your staff that you work with who also understand this.
Yes.
That's been so big, because neurodivergent people process emotions way bigger than most. So like we have an overdeveloped amygdala most of the time. So even our amygdala that processes like stress response and a lot of other emotions, it's really reactive. And this is amazing. It's a double-edged sword, like everything though. So it's like, if we love something, we're like the best marketers for it. We're the best. We want to tell everybody, well, we're going to learn everything about it, and we have all the energy for it. We can become experts in something really fast. If we are upset, like if we hate something, or we're upset, or something's wrong, we're going to be the biggest inconvenience, the biggest nightmare. We can't function whatsoever beyond that emotion set. But it's really cool though, because with, for example, human rights, like a lot of people will go, oh, somebody else's human rights are being violated. A lot of people will be like, oh, good, it's not me. And their emotions aren't like, they're like, oh, I'm upset for that other person, but I don't have to do anything about it. But often a lot of neurodivergent people will be like, watching them get abused is so alarming that like I can't keep sitting here in my cushy job and doing nothing. Like they're much more likely to stand up for others even when they'll lose something, because our emotions are just so big, and they don't let us just sit around and do nothing.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so it's big that our therapists are all neurodivergent, because then it really changes a lot of the mental health message, which is often like, oh, how can you be less and smaller? How can you be less weird and mask more and fit in? Which is a lot of like neurotypical counseling for neurodivergent people. normies or whatnot, how they approach neurodivergence is like, okay, how can you be more normal? But in our center, it's much more like, oh, cool, let's really fully stretch out and harness and figure out who are you when you're the biggest you can be, and how can we make your environment accommodate that, and how can we write letters to support that, and how can we get you friends around that believe in that and want you to be your biggest self.
It's like a growth mindset.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. Wow.
It's really something I really needed in my own growth, because I also for a lot of years was taught okay, be quiet, don't bother anyone, don't speak up. I had a lot of trouble sharing my anger because that wasn't really invited in the household properly, and so I was anytime somebody would do something cruel to me, I'd be oh no, and I'd go away. But then it took a lot of years to be wait, I know what's right. I've researched this. This person is actually in the wrong, or they're violating my own or other people's rights. This is a good time to get bigger and get angrier. I've had to do so much to expand myself back from the tiny box, that the world tried to shove me in.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think a lot of kids, they feel that there's something wrong with them, and they're always measuring them. And society's saying to everybody, "You're not good enough." And then we wonder why these people are having anxiety and depression. Why do we wonder?
And
what are we doing to people?
We have a system that, that tests and says, these are your strengths, these are your weaknesses, these are the things you can't do. We're emphasizing you cannot do, and everybody knows what you cannot do.
Mm-hmm.
And
where's the what can you do?
Yeah, and what I'm thinking about young children is their lack of language skills. I mean, they're struggling with language anyway. They're still learning it. But emotions, as you said, what did you say about emotions? That emotions really matter.
They're so important. And there's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yes.
I hope that's the actual name. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
An author I one day want to remember his name.
I've forgotten to. Yeah, I know it.
Anyways, look it up. But Thinking Fast anyway.
Thinking Fast and Slow.
There we go. I'm bad at finding the words when I need them. Anyway, but he talks about how we're as a society we're so into logic. We try to be okay, well, I'm only going to do something if it logically makes sense, and you wait for that logic to come and whatever. But then and that's called slow thinking, right? And then you've got fast thinking, which is actually your emotions, because your emotions come from your subconscious, which is actually a way bigger supercomputer than your conscious mind. Because you might go to a restaurant and remember what you talked about a little bit, maybe the shirt that person was wearing, maybe that the waitress had a cool tattoo. Your subconscious will remember the amount of floor panels on the floor, what everyone around you was talking about from the little tidbits of conversation you caught. Remember exactly what you were wearing, they were wearing, what the waiter was wearing, that the waiter was had a cold, and that they just were running back and forth to sneeze over there. You remember everything. And so how that subconscious supercomputer talks to you is by sending emotions. Emotions are just data packets from your subconscious to your conscious mind that are saying, hey, FYI, pay attention to this or that for your either thriving or survival or whatever, to make sure that you're getting the signals. So as a society, that we've labeled that as bad is ridiculous, because it's the biggest thing that preemptively gives you messages and you might not consciously be aware why, oh, I feel sad today, I have no idea why, there's no reason. But then eventually that slow thought will come with the logic and be oh, actually, I realize now, my boss is actually mean to me quite regularly, but everyone's always mean to me, so I kind of ignored it, but maybe I'm at my limit now. Or even deeper, emotions tell you things don't move to that country, and you might think consciously, why not? Why? It's a great country, I love it, I can do surfing there. But then your subconscious is actually picking up things there's actually due to have an earthquake soon, and they have a lot of trouble, the industry for teaching is about to dry up, so you're actually likely to have trouble in that country, and this and that, and a bunch of stuff your conscious mind has no idea it knows. And so your subconscious talks to that conscious mind in symbolism through through your emotions and through your dreams and through other things where you're oh, I have this strong intuition, and that's your subconscious trying to be stop doing stupid crap. Listen to me for survival. And as a society, we've been oh, that's useless, let's ignore it, and then we all do awful things we know are horrible and just try to push that away.
Do you mostly work with adults or kids, or both?
Both, yeah, we do adults, kids, couples counseling, friendship counseling, everything under the sun. Eventually, over time, we built all the services because we were okay, so we work with ADHD and autism, but like, what are all the concerns of our clients and what do they need? And so we now have like a whole network of like naturopathic doctors and psychologists and coaches and therapists and all the things. Yeah.
We need
like,
that here.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just, you've said so much. My mind's blowing because, there's conscious to the subconscious. And I'm thinking about my children when they went to school and they didn't have the language you don't have the language to say anything. That's one. And the emotions are there. The emotions, you freeze.
Yeah.
What are the implications of that?
Oh, okay, yeah. So a lot of time, again, especially with neurodivergent kids, but all kids, I mean, how much language do we have, do kids have to explain what they're needing? But especially neurodivergent kids, they've been taught from a young age that anytime they need something, they're like, someone's like, no, you don't really need that. That's not that important. But for us, actually, a lot of what look like wants are needs. Because we actually, a lot of us don't have enough, something called dopamine. That's one of the neurochemicals it's kind of dysregulated. So either we have way too much and we're hyper-focused, or we have way too little and we're like bored and it makes us like legitimately stupider for a while and we like can't grasp things. So often a kid will ask for like, hey, I need to watch TV or can I read a book or can I go play video games? And the parent will be like, what? No. But if that's the way that they build dopamine, or if they're like, while they hang out with their friends or watch a comedy thing or play with the dog, and you're thinking, oh, that's a want, like that's what you get after you've worked hard, but not what you get beforehand, like that's your dessert kind of thing. But we often need our dessert first. So anyway, a lot of the time, that's going to be seen as wants by people. So the kids, even if they know what they want, they're kind of systematically erased from their mind to like not really know anymore. And that's why you get a lot of neurodivergent kids, especially autistic kids, who say, I don't know a lot. You might be like, hey, what's wrong? I don't know.
Yeah.
Should we do something about it? Seems like there's a problem.
I don't know.
No, just no. And often they're locked up, they're overwhelmed. If you put them on the spot because they've learned that if they actually share what's up, you're going to tell them they're wrong and selfish and annoying and in the way and taking too long. And so they just learn to be like, okay, I'll be whatever you want. And then you get in ADHD kids, they start to lie a lot. So you get a lot of like lying of like, oh, I'll just tell you what you want. I'll create a whole new world for you adults to just like get off my back. And autistics are super honest. So they don't want to lie as often. So the autistic kids naturally will be more like, I don't know. Because they just want you to go away, and they found stonewalling is the strategy for them. So, yeah.
Yeah. Gosh.
I taught a student who just said to me, I don't know. No, I didn't teach her. I tried to. And when you're on Zoom, you have limited options.
Yes. Very, very true. That would be hard for a teacher. Like you're like, how do I help you?
Yeah. And the answer is, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, and I think Alina has a point, because a lot of these students have been through this, and it's almost like a learned helplessness also.
Yes.
Or like you said, I've tried and I haven't gotten help. And I think we had interviewed my son a few weeks ago, and he said something similar. Like, I had been at school with people whose job it was to try to teach me, and it still hadn't worked. Why would he expect anybody else to be able to do any different?
Exactly. Like it takes actually huge resources to build hope. Like we think like to get someone, hey, like try this is gonna work this time.
Yeah.
And, like people can only take so long that we take them to the top of like a building and then push them off. And then they fall in the crush of that first like broken hopes. And they go and they hope, oh, maybe this person will understand me, and they crush. And so that then you get a lot of people that as kids or adults start to go, oh, there's no point in trying. Yeah. Like, no, I don't believe you. Nothing's really going to get better. There's like, and that's really draining for the parents as well. And I mean, for the person to have themselves, for the parent, for the partner, for the teacher of those people. But they've first been drained of life by society. Yeah. And now they become these drainers of life from everyone around them, because they can't thrive anymore. They can't, think of good things. And society broke that for them, and it's society's job to fix it.
Yeah. So my son mentioned that too. At one point he felt hopeless. So how do you, Alina, take somebody who's hopeless? and
yeah.
bring them back.
So I mean, it's quite therapeutic. Like, it's not so much like, do this with everyone, this will go great. But like, what we do at our centers, because it's like actually like rebuilding someone's hope is a really complex and vulnerable process. Because while you try to rebuild it, you could actually make it way worse. Where now the extra are going to be resistant to anyone trying to bring hope into their lives. So you got to be really careful. But one of the things we do is like we don't talk, like we know everyone's already tried to get them, hey, you can just exercise. Why don't you just exercise? Why don't you just go outside for a walk? You know, why don't you? We know everyone's bothered them in their entire life, just trying to poke them into actions. So what we do instead is we tackle the subconscious. So we do something at the counseling center. We developed a model called the PI model. It's for parts inclusion, so the parts inclusion model. And it's something we've learned that like your conscious mind, especially if you've been abused a lot of your life, has huge amount of defense mechanisms everywhere. So like, don't solve the problem from the conscious mind. Go in through the subconscious and the symbolism, like explore what's there. And so it's like parts elements have been part of psychology for a long time. Like in Gestalt therapy, more modern now, in internal family systems. So we created our own version over like the last 5-10 years that we've been using really effectively. As we talk about like all these avatars that live in your subconscious. So it's a lot like the movie Inside Out, which actually is based on really good psychological research by Dr. Paul Ekman. And I really recommend to watch it if you haven't, the Pixar movie. I believe it's Pixar. So we go in and we try to get them to wake up those emotions by understanding like what are the parts that live inside of you. So for example, here are some of my parts. So we make it like it's really actually really fun to do. So like inside of me, I have one called Sprout. She's like a little fairy that lives in like a teapot in the garden, and she holds the emotions, because usually most parts hold a couple emotions. Because again, it's your subconscious. We're just giving a mouth to like that subconscious supercomputer. So this part of my subconscious is really into like when I get really happy or excited, and also when I get like really sad. It's very impulsive emotions is this part, because she's like 4 years old. And she loves being outside, and she loves like telling people very honestly what's on her mind, and not having any secrets, and she loves like running around and swimming and stuff. And so I had to really reconnect to her. But then I also had another part I found called Dark Alina. So Dark Alina is my parts that's very about like boundaries and about telling people like needs and being preventative around things like that, and having like good space with other humans and like kind behavior. And so she's kind of the alarm system that if someone starts being mean to me, she starts being like saying things and thinking things, and essentially sending it to me via like it's when your subconscious communicates with you. So for example, mine, like the different parts actually use different ways to communicate. So Sprout might quickly kind of show me visuals, versus Dark Alina really quickly puts like she like speaks in swear words, and I just get really sweary, and I can tell like, oh, okay, like Dark Alina is kind of that part of my mind. And then I have another part that's like my resilience and bravery, and that part's always like, yeah, we need to do this, and it's like they're like one of those 90s superheroes raising their arm with the background music. Anyway, yeah, so it's like we help them get to know their parts like their avatars in a game, because actually very often with ADHD or autism, when we play a lot of games, like board games, video games, we love role-playing games, and often the characters we play in these different games are parts of our subconscious. Like we play out being way braver than we are, because we actually have a part of ourselves that's trying to communicate with us and wants that expression. You know, another part of us might be, you know, the one that another avatar might be someone who goes through a lot of growth and like change and stuff like that, and that part's like the more introspective part, and we might play that role. I know I've said a lot, but we've had a lot of success with this as a trauma modality, and it's currently being researched at a couple different universities, and it's the way to rebuild hope, like the best thing we found to do. Yeah.
It's taking, you know, what they do normally, isn't it? But using some psychology and getting them to do some thinking at a deeper level without feeling vulnerable.
Exactly. It's like a way of processing without first needing to be vulnerable, because you can talk about somebody else.
Yes.
You know, like it's just a part of you, and that's how we actually exist. Like much of the time, we're actually feeling like 5 emotions at one time. You know, we're actually often feel like we're not just like upset. We're like usually excited, sad, disappointed. You know, so it's like as you can hear multiple voices at the same time in your head, and they can almost, as you get healthier, they all work together like on a panel of experts. Then you can start communicate. Okay, one part of me wants this, and one part of me wants something different. And once you understand all their needs, they're less likely to sabotage each other in the process.
We do have a question from Chris Letchford who says, what does society need to learn about students that are struggling?
Ooh, well, let's see, everything, but let's start with
Everything, yep.
yeah, let's start with maybe understanding what is a struggling student. So if a student is cheating a lot, they're a struggling student. If a student is acting out in class, they're a struggling student. If a student is like always alone and doesn't want to join any groups, they're a struggling student. And often we don't see these as struggling students. We see these as failures of different kinds, liars. We see these as like kids that won't fit in, and they're struggling students. It's not just in their grades. So I think one big thing we need to like reframe a lot of it from like, oh, this kid is being rebellious or going against things or cheating or being bad, and more change it to, okay, this kid is using very creative ways to achieve their goals because we are not helping them adequately do that. We're not stimulating them. We're not giving them the right options. I also think there needs to be so much more therapy opportunities in school. That was actually something when I was in grade 6 or 7. I remember, I feel like I made this up in a way, but her name was Penny Applebottom in my memory, and she came to the school to like kind of, and I had like one therapy session, maybe 2 with her, and just having an adult listen to me and not like accuse me of things and just like really be curious about my world, that was actually quite revolutionary. And so just like more therapy, more emotions education, more emotional intelligence teaching, more healthy communication, and also healthy ways to challenge your teachers that isn't authoritarian. So being like, hey, if you have trouble with some of the coursework, or you're going, hey, this isn't updated, like there's new history or there's something else, this might not be right. Having a way to communicate with teachers where that's not disrespectful, where you can where that discourse is invited, and you'll already be doing so much better with neurodivergent kids at least.
Chris is back again, and he said, Chris Chase, what are some devices or techniques that can be used to help students?
Let's see. Okay, so the LiveScribe Smart Pen, that's great, and it costs like somewhere like $200-ish, though you can probably get them used. And that's the thing I talked about earlier in the interview, or this session. It was like you write with a pen, and it takes in the audio recording of everything, but it's not just the same as an audio recorder, because you can click back what you wrote, and it'll play what the professor or teacher was saying at that time. And there's a version for the computer that's free of that, which is OneNote. OneNote has a similar thing in the audio recording function, where it'll audio record what's happening around you, and then and as you type, it'll connect it so you can later go, oh, when I was typing this, what did the professor say or the teacher say, and it'll do that. It'll play it back. So that's super helpful because then you miss nothing. So that's great. And I do recommend, and I know this is time consuming, but I really recommend going through the class almost like twice for kids. Like first just to listen to it like while semi-distracted, just taking the big ideas, and then again now how are these ideas related? Like put them in a chart, or let's flashcards, let's like understand them. So those are some things, but mostly really just tying things to special interests, and being very strengths-based is very important. So for example, nowadays in school, like it used to be more, let's take what you're crappy at and make you okay, and everything you're really great at, let's just let it kind of die on the vine and not get nurtured because you're fine at that. And so you spend all your time focusing on what you suck at, which deteriorates self-esteem and takes away all your energy to push forward and what could you do here. So I'm really into outsourcing, wait until the kids actually want to learn that thing. In the meantime, like focus on what they can do really well, like say they're great orators, like good at talking. So get them to do a lot through talking instead of writing. And then at some point, life will demand that, hey, all my kids are writing the stuff, or all my friends are writing the stuff. Now I'm curious about how to do that. Or like, I'm now ready to socialize, or now I'm ready to learn math. When they feel a need, then it's like, good, let's teach them. Because once they have a need themselves, or an interest, or we've brought their special interest, so they're actually like, oh, how does it work? Now you're going to teach them. Like that is more likely to go well and not be traumatic. Unfortunately, the school system is not like that yet, but I think with a lot of virtual reality education, and in fact, like the government of South Africa and also the governments of Fiji and some other governments are looking into using VR as their future of education, because it costs so much less to create. They don't have the teaching facilities, the buildings, the new books. All they now need to have is like a cheap, like virtual reality sets are getting really cheap now. So they just have to give everyone these sets, and then you have every type of classroom imaginable that you can go at your own pace. I'm a big VR person. I love that. It's like, especially in the pandemic, I got really into it. Yeah.
That's amazing. It's anyway. Let's get off. Zena has said, "I've heard." Would you still say a student is struggling if their grades are generally fine? Maybe they're hyper concerned with them being stellar, but they don't want to join groups.
So sorry. The question is.
Would you still say a student is struggling?
So their grades are good, but they don't want to join groups.
Yeah, but they want their results to be stellar, not okay, but they don't want to join groups.
I think that's a good question. I would say that every family has their own goals for their kids. So, like, some families will be like, oh, they're doing well in school, and they have no social needs for them, or expectations. But some families, like, you need to be really well-rounded. It depends on their goals, also the kids' goals. So let's say, do they want to go to med school? If so, they need to be doing a bunch of extracurriculars and other things or whatever. If they want to be a plumber, maybe they don't need to be doing those things, right? So it's figuring that out. And also, the biggest question, is the child struggling? Like, do they feel like something is wrong? That's really important. So figuring that out. So I would say it really depends on a lot of factors in that situation.
That's good, because she said that she's loved the talk overall about neurodiversity and being a child. And Chris Letchford said, you mentioned role-playing games earlier. Do you see gaming as helpful for people with dyslexia to take a break from the real world?
I see, like, gaming can be equally amazing and evil all at the same time. And it's actually the same for TV for me. So I find TV so stimulating. It almost made me drop out of my undergrad. I was kind of like depressed, a bit suicidal, and I just wanted to leave my life. And so then I would watch TV for like 20 hours straight every day, and that's how I dealt with things. But now, as an adult, having gone to a lot of trauma therapy, healing a lot of stuff for me, I use TV as a huge motivator. That, like, if I have to go do hard work, I go, okay, 15 minutes of TV, 5 minutes of hard work, 15 minutes of TV, 5 minutes of hard work. It's boosting my dopamine until I'm eventually like, okay, my work is interesting now, and I'm off. So I think it's the same with video games. Like, it's an amazing source of socialization, like meeting so many new friends. A lot of times, they play these games because they're good at it. So they're getting that mastery. It's very good for boosting dopamine. And for and they do learn like amazing skills, like hand-eye coordination can be grown and all sorts of stuff. And if you're using it for learning, amazing, right? Say it's like, okay, we play this game, but to get to every part, you have to do math a little bit. They'll get better at math, if they love it. So it can be amazing, but also it's a place where neurodivergent kids especially go when they're feeling really disconnected from society. They don't have friends, they don't have connections, they hate everyone at school, they hate their parents don't get them. Oh, finally the video games get them, and so then they'll spend all their energy there. So the solution isn't like cut off the video game, it's more figuring out what are they using the video game for, and are they using it more addictively, where they're doing it in a way that is causing them problems that they themselves are like, okay, they're getting in the way of their own goals, and they're like not able to fulfill their responsibilities, right? Like, then it's like, okay, how do we use this properly for you and not addictively? And how do we also roll good things into it? Like, some parents want family time, and they think, oh, how do I get my kid to do these things and have dinner with us? And maybe the important question is, how can you go play Minecraft with your kid, create a family server or whatever, and go play Minecraft? Now you have family time, and they're having a good association with you, and they get to be gaming, and that's amazing, So it's like figuring out how you can connect the two, and don't be quick to demonize video games.
Yeah.
That's a hugely separating thing. Like, that's another thing. And my family hates my video games. They so don't get me. Yeah. Were you going to say something, Lisa?
No, I do a lot of dyslexic learners, for example, and I know a lot about dyslexia because I have those types of learners. They're highly visually, spatially. Their talent is in those areas, and so this Minecraft, for example, I can't do it. I can't make sense out of what I'm seeing, and they're like, look at this, and I can do this, blah 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 blah, and it's very visual. And I think school tends not to be very visually oriented. I just today we went to help. My older son is moving into a cottage, and there's some plumbing work that needed to be done. And I watched my husband and my other dyslexic son just like problem solve this, and I'm looking at this mess of pipes. It looks like a big mess to me, and they're just the way they can do things and visualize stuff is you can't match that. But they don't understand that that's a talent. Sometimes they're always looking at what they did, where their deficit was coming from school. And I think getting back to the trauma discussion, I think that's why we see that, because they keep seeing what they're not good at, where their deficit is, as opposed to what are they great at.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's so good that you brought up with dyslexia that there's that physical, they just do so well with the visual and stuff. And very commonly, especially with ADHDers, they tend to be a lot more physical. Like a lot of our athletes are ADHD and dyslexic and stuff. Not everyone, but definitely that's a big thing. And the school system isn't really
get to that question.
There can be a lot of loss, especially if the kid isn't a team player. Then it's hard to figure out how do we stimulate them, and so I'd say work with video games, and work with and find in-person video games. Like ask really important questions, like, hey, what are you getting out of this video game? You know, like, what do you love the most about it, and is there something we could do in real life that has elements of that, or like, are you curious about learning this or that? Like, so
and don't we also use sports and video games as like either punishment, we take it away. If you can't do this, then we're going to take that away. If you don't get an A on this test, or if you don't do your homework, or if the school calls one more time, I'm going to, take this away. Or the schools themselves will say you have to have a certain grade point average to play a sport, and you're taking away their talent. I don't know. I could go on about that, but I don't want to get too negative.
No, I totally agree with you. And I think if you have a kid that's really into video games, I think that's a cue that if you can access it, because I know it is hard to access, it's expensive and difficult sometimes, but get some family therapy, because likely what's happening is the kid is just, they don't trust you, they don't feel like the world gets them, and so then they're going further and further and having other people have influence over them. And because video games can often have very aggressive environments, be quite unkind sometimes, like the more they're looking there for their influence, like the more they might grow into like people that are more into like conspiracy theories or various things like that, because that's kind of just what's on the internet, and like get more into anger and or into hating things. That's just, again, really, these are very transmissible memes on the internet, these kind of things. But if there's a connection with the parent and their life and their peers, then they're taking that influence more from their parents and life and peers than the video games. So if you're really getting a huge exposure to those video games, family therapy, not just like pulling them away, but literally like figuring out what made life suck for you. How do we fix it now?
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Yes, I've got one question for us, and we've got to watch our time now because we've got a time limit through Google. And he says, what do you think of two dyslexic people founding a game design company to show that because we're dyslexic, we can change and influence the gaming industry? What do you think about it? Amazing.
Great. And well, often ADDers and autistics and people with learning disabilities and dyslexia do amazing in entrepreneur roles, especially if they have some structure and good business partners. Like, great, because we don't fit that well into hierarchies or like having bosses. So amazing that you did that. And the video game industry, there's so much money in it right now. It's a huge empire of billions of dollars a year. So there's a lot of work there, and I think that's important for parents to realize as well. Like, this is their training for work a lot of the time, playing video games in a way.
Alina, where can we find you? What your final words, and where can we find you?
Great. Well, we are the ADHD and Spectrum Center, and you can find us at ADHDinterrupted.com. That's ADHDinterrupted.com, because that's what I originally named it like 12 years ago, and then I realized I had autism, and then now we do all the things, but I haven't changed my website. I don't know, I'll think about it, but that's us. Fantastic.
Lisa, where can we find you?
Oh, Facebook and YouTube on Monday afternoon, and I guess LinkedIn.
Well, thank you. You know, this has been a phenomenal discussion, and I'm going to make some notes from it and put them up on my blog, because I think a number of things you've said are so important for us as parents to reflect on our children, reflect on our backgrounds, and the gap between conscious and subconscious. And the author you're talking about was Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, and yes, I have read it.
Yay, great, really important book. And thank you so much. This was such a fun forum, and thank you, Lisa and Lois, for like talking about this huge topic. I was like, oh yay, trauma and education, like, yes, there's so many problems. People.
Yeah, I really enjoyed meeting you, and it was great having this discussion. I think it's really a
I think that's
great
it.
topic, and just need more of it.
Yes, we're just trying to share to limit the damage and have people think a little more widely about consequences and all that we're doing, particularly for those that struggle the most. So thank you very much. And next week, join us at 4 o'clock. We've got Tricia Cook. Hit like, hit subscribe, and notifications for the bell, whatever. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.